and welcome to Mind Gourmet. My name is Nina Kaiser. I'm the co-founder of Mind Gourmet and, as always, your host today. My today's guest is best-selling author, journalist, and lecturer Lynne McTaggart, creator of The Power of Eight, harnessing the miraculous energies of a small group to heal others, your life, and the world. Hi, Lynne. Welcome.
Hi, nice to be with you today.
I am so looking forward to our conversation, and before I'm really diving in with you, I'd like to introduce you to the probably very few people who are going to watch this who don't know you yet. Lynne McTaggart is one of the central voices in the New Consciousness movement. She is the award-winning author of 7 books, including the worldwide bestsellers, The Field, The Intention Experiment, The Bond, and her newest book, The Power of Eight. Lynne is consistently listed in the Watkins annual list of the 100 most spiritually influential people in the world. As editorial director of What Doctors Don't Tell You, she publishes one of the world's most highly praised health publications and runs very popular health and spirituality teleconferences and workshops. Lynne is also the architect of the Intention Experiments, a web-based global laboratory which was prominently featured in the plotline of Dan Brown's blockbuster, The Lost Symbol. Lynne is a member of both the Transformational Leadership Council, launched by Jack Canfield, and the Evolutionary Leaders, launched by Deepak Chopra. She has appeared in many documentaries on the science of spirituality, including What's the Bleep?, The Living Matrix, I Am, and The Abundance Factor. She's a highly sought-after public speaker presenting at conferences and workshops around the world. Lynne and her husband, What Doctors Don't Tell You co-founder Brian Hubbard, live and work in London, UK. They have 2 adult daughters. So I would like to start with the prologue of The Power of Eight. It has been so interesting for me to read. I mean, all the book, but I love forewords and prologues. And you open it with saying, "For many years, I refused to write this book because I didn't believe for one moment the strange healings that were happening in my workshops, which is to say, I had a hard time handling miracles." Can you share a little more with us what happened and how you thought and also felt about it?
Okay, sure. Well, for many years before that, I had been running a thing called the Intention Experiment, which is this global laboratory. I wanted to test the power of thought to change things. You know, many scientists have basically demonstrated through their experimental evidence that a thought isn't just a thing. A thought's a thing that affects other things. So I wanted to find out how far we can take this. You know, can we cure cancer with our thoughts? Or are we just talking about some little subtle shift of a quantum particle? So I set up this global laboratory using a lot of well-respected scientists doing consciousness research at prestigious universities like Princeton or University of Arizona. And I also invited my readers around the world, or an audience, if I had a large audience somewhere, to take part in periodic experiments where the scientists would set up something as a controlled experiment, and then I would have my readers, followers, or audience send an intention to a particular target. And we had run a number of them by 2008. By now, we've run 33 of them, and 29 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. You know, there's no drug out there with that kind of consistent track record. So it worked. I didn't expect it to work, but it really worked. But by about 2008, when I had run some seed experiments and water experiments, I wanted to try to see what would happen if I scaled it down into a workshop setting. But I had never run a workshop before. You know, I'd run a few, but nothing of this area. And I certainly didn't know what to do about small group intention. I knew the rudimentaries of, the rudimentary techniques of intention from working with intention masters, you know, Buddhist monks, master healers, Qigong masters, and also studying what worked in the laboratory. In in what sorts of techniques maximized mind over matter studies. So I put them together as a little program I call Powering Up. But I didn't know what a small group should do. So I was kind of making it up as I went along. I was thinking, well, I'll put them in, I had said to my husband, I wasn't really sure what I should do to put this in a workshop. So I said to him one day, well, I don't know, maybe I'll put them in groups of 8 or so and have them send healing intention to a member of the group with a health challenge. And he, being a good headline writer, said to me, yeah, I love that, the power of it. And that's, how it came about, totally by accident. So we put people in groups of 8. I taught them intention techniques, but as for how the group should behave, I'm making it up as I go along. I'm telling them they have to hold hands, or the person can be in the center, but you have to keep in touch with him or her. So it's an unbroken circle. And they do this and they do that about holding the same thought at the same time. And I assumed that they would come back to us the next day and say, well, that was like getting a facial, a nice little relaxing, feel-good effect. That is not what happened. What happened is when people lined up who had been the receivers, one after another, they described being healed essentially in an instant. They talked about there was one person with depression that had been lifted. There was somebody else with a really bad knee pain who was hobbling before and was walking normally. There was somebody else with IBS, her stomach felt normal that day. Somebody else with migraines, she had a normal head too. She first time she had no headache for years. And on and on and on it went. A woman with cataracts who said she was 80% better. And I was totally shocked by this. Mm-hmm. So very quickly disbelieving. I thought, this is just a placebo effect. They've got the expectation of healing, and so that's what's causing it. But over and over again, in workshop after workshop, and I've run, hundreds, thousands of groups by now, people in those groups, many of the people in those groups underwent instant healings. We had Diane, whose mom was she had such bad scoliosis, she was in terrible pain, and her pain completely vanished during the small group circle. But then her daughter wrote me a few months later to say her mother's back was so straight they'd had to change the rear view mirror in her car. We had somebody else with a dislocated arm that just slotted right back into place and stopped hurting in any way. Somebody else who was scheduled for a knee replacement, and as soon as she finished the intention, she did a deep knee squat. Her knees had been so bad she couldn't even walk on them. And on and on and on and on like this, over and over and over again. And so that was the miracles that I'm talking about. And that was what I couldn't figure out. And really the book was an attempt to figure out what on earth was going on there.
Yeah, and you describe yourself as somebody who's drawn to life's great mysteries and biggest questions, and on the other side is hard-nosed reporter who is constantly looking for solid evidence. So how was that inside of you? Was it really like did you battle with it?
Yeah, I battled with it because those two weren't mutually exclusive. I am drawn to life's greatest mysteries, but I look for hard evidence because I am an investigative reporter by background. So all of my books are really looking at the scientific evidence of these great things like near-death experiences and life after death and intention and the new science. The idea that we're all connected by a quantum energy field. Yeah. That was my first book in this area of the field. And so I've always sought to, the hard evidence for these things and for the idea that we're far more interesting and grander than we've been told. We've been described in very reductive ways according to the conventional view in science. And the new science coming forward is describing something very, very different, with far more extended human potential, with the currency of life being energy and frequency, not chemistry. So I was always drawn to that, but as you say, I was kind of an ultimate doubting Thomas. That's why I started the intention experiment. I didn't believe all of the nonsense that had been circulated about intention and manifestation and, you know, this, as The Secret had, it just seemed to me more or less just I want, I get. And I really wanted to test that. I didn't believe that. So when these instant healings started happening in my workshops, I also was very disbelieving. It was very difficult for me. I had to find out why. And so the book tries to find out why, all the different things that it might have been that caused these instant healings, which have carried on to this day. And the other weird thing about it was not only that there were instant healings, but there were mirror effects. You know, if we were intending for peace, we ran a big peace intention experiment for Sri Lanka around a little bit after that first Chicago workshop. And I surveyed the participants. There were about 15,000 of them after that, in that experiment. And I mean, it was very interesting. The experiment had, you know, seemed to work in that violence went down after the experiment, but during the week we were sending intention, violence quadrupled. But we found out afterward it was, and we were using a team of scientists to analyze the results that we got, looking at violence data, weekly deaths and injuries from 2 years before this, in this war, to 6 months afterward. And we found that, and this war had been going on for 25 years, we found that the government, which had been losing, won a number of decisive battles, which enabled it to take back the whole north of the country, which had been choked off by the rebels and was being held. A lot of people were being held essentially as hostages. And so they were able to take back the north, and within a few more months after that, this 25-year war, which was intractable, which wasn't going forward, was over. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
The more interesting thing was what happened with our participants. When I surveyed the participants, I found that they were also having peace in their lives. They were making up with estranged relatives. They were connecting with, you know, with long lost friendships. They were getting along better with their not so nice bosses and their, you know, and their coworkers. I mean, they were connecting in every way like that. And most interestingly, about half of them said, I feel more love for everyone I come into contact with. You know, they were hugging strangers. So it started to occur to me that there was some sort of weird mirror effect going on here too.
And actually, that is exactly what I wanted to ask you to go a little deeper in, because to me, an incredibly powerful result of your research is finding that the act of giving is actually equally or even more powerful than being the receiver of an intuition. It gives me the chills, really, because in some way this says really like yin and yang, that giving and receiving in some sense is kind of the same thing. So I would love you to tell us a little more about the power of giving and your research on altruism.
Okay, well, it started to make me, you know, I started realizing that people who were engaged in these big peace intention experiments or healing intention experiments, at one point we sent intention to heal a young man called Todd Voss of PTSD. He had been a veteran of the Gulf Wars, and he had come back really traumatized with post-traumatic stress disorder, and used to go in a room and he would put his back to one wall and be studying, you know, very hyper-vigilant, looking for terrorists, I guess. And so we sent intention to him, and it looked like it worked because his brainwaves showed more evidence of calmer brainwaves, you know, of alpha brainwaves, meaning what happens when we're in a sense of peaceful light meditation. And also he went off and went traveling after that, never had any more treatment with the neuroscientist we'd been working with, and also ended up finding the love of his life and marrying and having children. So it looks like maybe we had done something, but more interestingly was what happened to the participants. This time, because we were emphasizing healing, they were getting healed. People were writing in who'd had, you know, bad knees, their knees felt normal. Somebody else had anxiety and panic attacks. He got over that. Somebody else had improvement to skin condition, and digestive issues cleared up. It just went on and on and on like that too. So the mirror effect with that kind of experiment was people getting healed in their own lives, their own health issues. So that was really interesting. And it started me thinking about the power of giving. And I started looking into this, largely because by that time too, I wanted to test this over a whole year. So I got 250 people together and asked them to be part of a master class that would go on for a year. So I would teach them for six sessions, and then they would be placed into groups and asked to meet with their groups every week. And we would monitor what was going on with them, not only with their health, but also their finances, their career, their relationships, their life's purpose. So very quickly in those groups meeting regularly, what I wanted to see was, would everything in their lives be, heal, not just their health? And very quickly, we got some amazing stories of people who had one woman, Patty, with chronic fatigue for 15 years, and her group helped her find the source of chronic fatigue, which was black mold hidden in her house. As soon as she cleared that up and cleared it out of her own system, she's now hiking and walking miles. Somebody else had depression. And again, the group helped him to locate the cause of the depression, which was a liver filtration system that wasn't working properly. As soon as he sorted that, he, was cured of his depression. But not everybody had that situation. There was a woman called Andy, who was a young woman who had 2 small children, was going through a divorce, had sold her gift store business and needed a new job. She was very good at marketing. She was very good at coaching. But everywhere she looked, she just couldn't secure herself a job. So we were trying all kinds of things with Andy and nothing was happening. So I finally just said to Andy, get off of yourself. Start contending for someone else. So the someone else I had in mind was a young guy called Luke, who was 15. His stepfather had written in about him. He had just broken up with his first serious girlfriend. And in a fit of adolescent angst, he had thrown himself off a 40-foot structure onto hard ground. So Luke broke everything in his body, and he had nerve damage, brain damage, et cetera, et cetera. And the doctors didn't think he was going to live. But we started doing a healing vigil for him while his stepfather kept a running commentary about what happened to Luke at the time we sent intentions. And Luke got better against all the odds. And his times of greatest improvement seemed to coincide with the times we were sending intention. And by the way, I sort of realized, and he was out of the hospital in record time, everything healed. By the way, I really realized from Luke that this was not a placebo effect, because Luke, like any adolescent boy, thought his parents' belief in the power of intention was pretty stupid. So it wasn't a placebo effect. But with Andy, the moment she started focusing on Luke, that very next week, she got a call out of the blue from somebody she didn't even know, offering her her dream job. So, and that happened over and over again. So when I started investigating altruism, I found that it's kind of like a bulletproof vest, because people who do things for other people are happier, healthier, and live longer in every regard. And so the power of doing for someone else is also the personal benefit that happens to you physically. When you do something for someone else, you activate a thing called the vagus nerve. It's the longest nerve in the body, and it winds itself from the neck through all the major organs of the body. And it also has to do with the release of those feel-good hormones like oxytocin, which get released when we're caring for a small child or something like that. But it also has this really hugely positive effect on the immune system. It keeps refreshing it and refreshing it. So we get better and better when we start, sending intention for someone else.
I think it is so important to know that taking your attention off of yourself can actually be the key. And this combined with the power of giving is, to me, so incredibly helpful when it comes to consciously co-creating my life. Because in co-creating our lives, I feel or I have the impression that in the personal development, we tend to be very intentionally to live the visions of our dreams. And I'm sure this has its place, but there's also this other place that says, get off of yourself and care and give. And it is also for your own benefit, or maybe
Yes.
mostly even. So if you look at your work and at your research, what would you say did you learn about the nature of consciousness and our extraordinary human capacity, the power of the collective?
Well, I mean, the great thing about coming together as a unity, when we do this, a group intention in some way, we experience the sense of unity consciousness. We experience what it feels like to be, we always talk about we're all connected. Well, it feels like that. I mean, I did a number of experiments. Again, the doubting Thomas in me was really needing to have proof. And one of the most persuasive studies was Life University. I had spoken there in 2015, and they offered to put their neuroscience department at my disposal. And they said, we will study Power of 8 groups. So we got 7 groups of volunteers among the student body. And in each group, we would put an EEG cap onto the heads of one of the senders. And we measured their brainwaves while they were doing Power of 8 groups, and we found a very interesting, consistent brainwave pattern. In every instance, just about, they would have a very big global quieting of parts of the brain that make us feel separate, particularly the parietal lobes, which sit right back here. Mm-hmm. And they help us navigate through space. They basically tell us, this is you, this is not you. So they were dialed way down. So were the parts of the brain, the right frontal lobes, that are to do with worry, doubt, negativity. They were also dialed way down. So this ended up being a brainwave signature characteristic of somebody in a state of ecstatic oneness. In fact, when we compared, it had nothing to do with the brainwave signatures of meditation. It had to do with the brainwave signatures of people like Sufi masters during ecstatic prayer, or ecstatic dancing, and Buddhist monks during ecstatic prayer. They also had the signature of ecstatic oneness. But the only difference was that, it takes years and years of contemplative practice to become a Sufi master or a Buddhist monk. Yeah. Our guys were total novices. They were student volunteers, most of whom had never even meditated before. And the only instruction manual they had was a 12-minute video from me telling them how to do the Power of 8. Nevertheless, they were transported into this altered ecstatic state. And remember, they were only holding the state for 10 minutes. But so there was no other conclusion to draw. You don't need years of disciplined practice. You don't need ayahuasca or sweat lodges. All you need is a group and a common intention, and it's your passport, your fast track to the miraculous.
Would you say there's a minimum number of people in the group?
Power of 8 came about by accident. It's a nice Goldilocks figure, as we like to say. It's not too little, it's not too much, but it still works with 5 people. It still works with 12 people. It's just 8 is probably a nice little optimum number, but not essential.
Mm-hmm. I do have a little Power of 4 group, and we enjoy to do weekly intentions, and
that would be good. Maybe add 1 person to it. Just make it a little bit bigger so you really do feel the group effect. 1 or 2 people more, if not 4 more. But yeah, it's it's any kind of group. Really, you do get a sense of that connection. You get a sense of unity, consciousness, and action. The other thing that I'm experimenting with, aside from setting up Power of 8 groups around the world, and if you don't have 7 friends, you can come on my website, lynnmctaggart.com/forum, where we can put you in touch with other people in your time zone who want to set up a group or already have a group set up. So you can either put an ad for a new group in your time zone or join an existing group. But the other thing that I'm doing a lot of experimenting with is large peace intention experiments as a way to overcome division. And last November, I ran a really interesting peace intention experiment. I had the good fortune to be in a studio that could place cameras in 9 different locations. So they could see me, but I also could see them. And it was interactive so that I could speak to them and then they could speak to me and then the other people in the other cities. So we had people in 8 Arab cities, in 8 different, in different Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, Jordan, etc. And then the 9th camera was in an auditorium of Israeli Jews. And it was just amazing. We set intention together, and it was also broadcast over my YouTube channel live, which meant people around the world who were my followers could watch and participate. And it was amazing what happened because, we set intention to lower violence in an area of the old city of Jerusalem that was experiencing a lot of violence near the Damascus Gate. And we chose that because it has a lot of symbolism for all the major religions.
Yeah.
So we put them all together, did this, and the data show that it looks like we did lower violence. But the more interesting thing was what happened to the Israeli and the Arab audiences. They started, after this event, they started sending love to each other. They started saying things like, "Your God is my God." And it was amazing. It was amazing because these are people who have been brought up to hate the other. And so they had this big connection. It made it all around the Middle East. It was been on TV. It's been in the newspapers in Israel. It's been tweeted by MPs in Kuwait as perhaps the way forward. Forget politicians and diplomacy. Just get people together from both sides and have them do some sort of common prayer together, essentially, which is what intention is. It's kind of a form of secular prayer. So we're going to do that again. On November 12th, we're going to run another intention, Heal the Middle East peace intention experiment. We're going to target somewhere else in the Middle East that's experiencing a lot of violence. And we're going to have audiences from Arab audiences, Israeli audiences, and American audiences all coming together for peace. And of course, we run around the world. It's free for anybody to join. They can go on my webpage, lynnmctaggart.com. On the very front page, there's a link to showing how you do it, which is you just sign up. It's completely free to join any of my intention experiments. But we need to know who you are to send you the links.
This is so beautiful. I have participated in one of your intention experiments. It was about part of a city in the US that was extremely violent.
The St. Louis experiment in September and October of last year.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a really interesting experiment. We wanted to pick the most violent place in America. And the most violent place in America was a certain area of St. Louis, northern St. Louis. It's actually the Fairground neighborhood, which contains a big chunk of Natural Bridge Avenue. And this has been voted officially the most dangerous place in America, with the highest numbers of deaths and killings and injuries, bodily harm against the person. So we used Dr. Jessica Utz of the University of California to analyze the results. We got monthly data of violent crime and property crime from 3 years before our experiment to 6 months afterward. And we got that for Fairground itself, the neighborhood we were focusing on, and also St. Louis as a whole. And we looked at both property crime and violent crime, even though violent crime was what we were focused on. So we found that fairgrounds violence had been going up. And with St. Louis as a whole, violence continued to go up. With property crime for St. Louis, it went up. It continued to go up. Property crime for fairground continued to go up. But violent crime for fairground plummeted by 43% over the year before. So that was a really interesting experiment. And once again, we have the same kind of rebound effects where people found their lives are becoming more peaceful. They were, there were parents whose children hadn't spoken to them for years who were getting back in touch. There were relationships between couples that were really improving. Peace was being created. It was really quite amazing.
Mm-hmm. What would you say? So I guess my question is, what can we do as a collective to keep these places, after crime, for example, has been reduced, stable?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that what we don't know is that whether or not this changes forever.
Right.
We don't know that. Sri Lanka has changed forever. It's now a very peaceful country.
True.
If we do this, who knows? There are a lot of variables. Maybe it was us, maybe it wasn't. But certainly we found this amazing rebound effect on the participants. So for me, the targets are really interesting and powerful, and they demonstrate our power as a collective to create change with consciousness. But I think the bigger effect that could be is the giant ripple effect that occurs among the people who take part, because everyone in their lives is affected by this. These are people who are going around hugging strangers. And if you have 15,000 of them, just multiply that by all the people they come in contact with, and you suddenly have a massive, massive effect. So for me, it's really all about the participation. And one of the things we're planning, we've got our November 12th Heal the Middle East experiment, but also we want to try to do a Heal the American Divide in the spring. We're planning to try to get auditoriums filled with Democrats and Republicans to come together and send intention together and see what happens.
How beautiful. So we have been talking about the forum of your website where people can find their own, or found their Power of 8 groups. We've been talking about the new intention experiment. If people want to connect with you and know more about you, or maybe even work through you or with you, are there other things that we haven't mentioned yet? Absolutely.
Every year I run a year-long masterclass called the Power of 8 Intention Masterclass. So I teach people for a number of weeks. We put them in groups. They meet every week in their groups. I send them weekly challenges, homework, all kinds of things like that. We have backup calls, we have bonus calls, so people get on and they can ask me questions through the year. And we've had extraordinary results every single year. The first time I did it, of the 250 people, 150 continued to meet regularly with their group. And of those 150, pretty much 100% of them had major, major life changes. They healed long-standing illnesses. They made up with estranged family members. They got new and exciting careers. They had amazing financial windfalls, or they just had a big epiphany about a new life purpose. But they all spun into amazing directions, and that happens every year. So my Intention Masterclass 2019 will kick off in the first weekend of February and then run for an entire year. So we'll be starting to advertise that soon. So if anyone wants to find out about that or anything else about what I'm doing, the new intention experiments, the other courses I give, the places I'm going to be speaking, anything about my books, my weekly blogs, I write a lot about the new science and lots of other things. They just need to come to LynneMcTaggart.com.
I think we are at a very beautiful place to close this conversation. And by the way, I could go on speaking with you forever. But before we say goodbye, I wanted to ask you, is there anything important from your perspective that we haven't mentioned and that needs still to be said?
No, just that, my book, The Power of Eight, has all the instructions about how to set up a group. And we have extra tools that people can get through me and my website for people who are setting up groups. And we encourage you to set up your group, experiment with it, but just continue to meet with it. What I have always felt through this whole process is that this was kind of gifted to me. I mean, I didn't choose to do this work, it chose me. And sometimes I feel like I'm taking dictation from the universe, but I feel I take the position very strongly that I'm the gatekeeper for this modality to make sure that it's done properly, it's done for the right reasons. And there are a lot of little things to learn about doing intention well. Most people aren't very specific in the way they do intention. They'll say, I want to be rich, when actually they want to have more time or get a new job or spend more time with their children or grandchildren. They don't necessarily want lots more stuff and things. So I really help them to be specific. But the point is that Power of Eight groups really, are your birthright. I've seen over and over again astonishing effects from these people getting together in small groups. So I really encourage you to find out how to do it, have a look at my book, and set up a Power of Eight group yourself. And see and watch your life getting transformed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you from my heart.
Thank you very much.
For sharing this time and space with me.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody, and always remember to take the driver's seat in this car called your life and create this lifetime to your taste. It's our pleasure here at Mind Gourmet to support you with our food for thought. Bye.